سلام على عمان وعلى أهل عمان وعلى ضيوف عمان. Good morning, everybody. I'm going to talk about nudge and behavioral insights and behavioral change today. So, we study in standard economic theory that people are rational agents, and this has dominated public policy for decades. So people are rational. You give them information, they process that, they act rationally in their own interest and the interest of their community. And policymakers have used those traditional policies in this regard. So they use essentially two levers. One is what we call command and control. More sanctions, more rules, more regulations. If you don't do this, you'll be punished. Or they pour money at the problem. That is, financial incentives, subsidies. But we know that the first one does not always work, and the second one is not sustainable over the long term. Nudge and behavioral insights uses knowledge and research methods from fields such as psychology, sociology, anthropology, economics, to better understand why people behave the way they do. The book Nudge is a milestone over the last decade. Nudge was written by Cass Sunstein and Richard Thaler. Richard Thaler went on to win the Nobel Prize a year ago, in 2017, for his work and contribution on behavioral economics. That field that integrates psychological insights into human behavior to better explain why people behave the way they do. So, nudge units have been set up around the world. A lot of policymakers have been inspired by this work. So, the first nudge unit to be set up around the globe was the one by David Cameron. David Cameron was the Prime Minister in 2010. He set up a nudge unit, started with 4 or 5 people, to work on behavioral change, but using more realistic policy tools, more realistic assumptions about behavior, assumptions that integrate realism into public policy. And they started experimenting. So this nudge unit started in 2010, and many other policymakers started doing the same. President Obama set up his own nudge unit in 2014, 2015. And since then, there has been more than 240 nudge units and behavioral insights initiatives around the globe, at least 50 of which are within government. Now, this has come to the region finally. So Qatar was the first to set up its own behavioral insights unit and nudge unit within the World Cup, within the Supreme Committee for Delivery and Legacy, to work on issues of sustainability, healthy lifestyle, workers' welfare, and entrepreneurship. Nudge Lebanon is another initiative that I founded also 2 years ago to work on post-conflict related issues, refugees, education, health-related issues, compliance, rule of law. Kuwait, under the leadership of the Supreme Council for Planning and Development, Dr. Khalid Mahdi also is the Secretary General who led the setup of the Kuwait Nudge Unit called KPAL, Kuwait Policy Appraisal Lab. Saudis announced they're setting up their own unit, and Oman also is following suit. So we've seen that many countries around the region in the GCC have their own vision documents, long-term vision followed by mid-term strategies and kind of plans where ministries are requested to align. So a lot of these problems, although they're similar, like they all tackle health issues, sustainability, private sector, social welfare, energy consumption, public finance management, more importantly, a lot of these issues have their own specificities in every country, of course, but a lot of these issues have behavioral roots, جذور سلوكية. and therefore cannot be addressed with traditional policy levers. It cannot be addressed with only requesting people to align. You cannot just expect people to be rational and act in their own interests. You cannot just come up with a law, a regulation, or give simply information to people, and people will process that and then come up with it. What's needed then is the nudge, that gentle push sometimes, or the behavioral intervention to get people to do the right thing. And the definition of a nudge now, in Arabic, we don't have the right word, but there are several. So al-nagza, al-wagza, al-tahfiz, al-tashjiyah, al-hadd, al-hath, all these are words that have a similar meaning. So a nudge is a small choice architecture type of intervention that steers people in the right direction without forcing them to do so and while being cost effective. So a subsidy is not a nudge. A ban is not a nudge. So these are the visions. If you look at Oman 2040, you find themes, you find focus areas. A lot of these could be prioritized and looked at with a behavioral lens. So you apply the behavioral lens, and what you do is can prioritize by strength of the behavioral roots. And kind of what comes most clearly is health is a policy challenge with a strong behavioral root. Education, environment and sustainability, and government and public service delivery. So you have that. The next thing that is typical in those cases is to go through the vision document in all its sectors and then do what we call a behavioral mapping or a dissection, tashrih suluki, to identify which challenges have a behavioral root and which ones have a structural root, and then act on those, particularly with the behavioral roots, with behavioral policy intervention, nudges and others. Take health, for instance. Health is a big problem around the region, and it's one of the problems that have strong behavioral roots. If we take, for instance, non-communicable diseases, okay, NCDs, this is a problem that we face in the GCC and Arab countries, non-communicable diseases such as cancer, such as diabetes, such as cardiovascular diseases. And these have, throughout the life cycle of these diseases, have behavioral bottlenecks, as we call them. And if we look at the risk factors, many of them are common. Eat healthy, practice, and do a few other things that are personal choices. So typically, the first thing is al-hamya, or the prevention. You start by prevention. And this, adopting healthy lifestyle, of eating, practicing, regularly doing things. So by doing this, you address many of the risk factors, but it doesn't solve all the problem. So we need to constantly monitor our health to detect potential challenges. So how many of you have done kind of a test of high blood pressure or diabetes recently? We need to do that regularly, but we don't do because we have those biases. We're overconfident. We don't think we will have that. So we have those biases, and we are kind of sometimes lazy, so we don't do what we're supposed to do. So as a result, behavioral insights can apply in those cases where you could use big social gatherings to get people to test and make it easy. So the big golden standard is make it easy. You want to make change? Make it easy, okay? Because that makes it kind of more automatic for people to apply. And the last one, if people test positive within this, medical adherence is one of the most important things. So medical adherence, and diabetes particularly, is a big problem. Take one particular issue, which is an experiment we did in Lebanon. So if you ask people to come and test your blood pressure level, they will say yes, no, later on. So basically, what we've done is waited for the marathon, the Beirut Marathon, and we made it so easy for people to come and test their blood pressure. So as they were getting their badges with their family, it was like a big festival. What we've done is asked them to test their blood pressure level. And what happened is that 25% of those had high blood pressure, but what's more interesting is that 76% of those were unaware of their condition. So a simple nudge at the right time in a social gathering managed to detect those. And as you know, a lot of NCDs, the earlier you detect, the easier to deal with the problem and the less costly from a healthcare perspective. Take also, I'm going to focus on energy. Energy is another big problem where if you want to deal with energy consumption, water consumption, which is a big goal for you in Vision 2040, you could try increasing rates. You could try to responsibilize people about the future generation, the importance of the environment. But you could do, in addition to that, you could use social norm, like it was done in so many different experiments, where you tell people how their consumption patterns compares with that of the neighbors. We've seen it working in many conditions. So they get the bill, and they get that comparison with that of their neighbor. We've done a similar experiment to get people to pay their taxes on time or pay their actual electricity bills on time in Lebanon, also using social norm. In government, also, the approach in the government or governance and public service delivery, the main approach we've been having is to increase sanctions, reduce discretion of government services, but we haven't been taken into consideration the cognitive biases. A lot of things could be integrated in this regard. So one way of kind of improving the public service delivery is to promote integrity. One experiment was done in Guatemala, was very simple, just including a line telling people that a failure to declare their taxes is an active choice. It's like they are deliberately kind of non-compliant. That had an impact of increasing compliance in an impressive way. There are, of course, the famous cases that use social norm to nudge people to pay on time, like the famous case done by the Behavioral Insights team in the UK to get them to pay on time, telling them 9 out of 10 of their neighbors have already paid their taxes. One very interesting experiment was done in the US, and now it's actually common, which is to streamline and kind of position and reframe application forms. So when we apply for government services, we typically sign at the end, I hereby declare, to the best of my knowledge, that what I kind of filled is true. So it turned out that changing the place of the signature has an impact on honesty of what we say. So they changed that in one of the experiments in 2015 in the US, and then put the signature box at the top. So priming people to sign at the beginning, I hereby declare that what I'm going to fill is going to be honest. And that increased 10% the honesty of reporting of certain car mileage in that case. So that is another thing that is also very important. What the US has done is something that we could learn from, particularly 1 year after the setup of the President Obama nudge unit in the White House, the social behavioral science team. What they've done is issued a decree 1 year later mandating every single public administration to integrate behavioral science into its work. One. Second, it mandated them that they reach out to the social behavioral science team for support and coordination on experimentation. So that's something that could be done by the Vision Office, by the government, to get every single government entity to integrate behavioral science into its work. I will conclude with a couple of thoughts. The first one is that behavioral insights, I did identify 4 sectors: education, health, energy, and public service delivery. Cuts across is a priority, but it should cut across all areas. Second thing, we should focus on capacity building. So not only knowledge of behavioral economics and behavioral insights, but more importantly, what Michael mentioned, focus on experimentation. What works is not what we think works, but what was tested to work, and running randomized controlled trials as much as possible, the way clinical trials have been designed for ages. So while a central steering model could be kind of appropriate for Oman, doing the nudge unit or the behavioral insights unit within the vision office or somewhere at the Ministry of Planning, it's important to be decentralized at the same time and build capacity in every single ministry that will apply behavioral insight in that way. Use of technology is going to be a big thing that will take behavioral insights and nudging to national scale, to wider level. At the end, my final word is to manage expectations. Yes, nudges and behavioral intervention are complementary tools. They're not alternative to policy tools, to the traditional policy tools, but they are important to make measurable improvement. Why? Because we experiment with what works. But it's not a panacea. It's a complementary tool. And the ethics of nudge is something we need to think about. So it's important to be transparent about the nudges. It's important to also celebrate successes and failures. So we need to be ready and manage expectation. Not all nudges might be successful. Some of them might fail. But talking about the failed nudges and experiments is as important. We learn from them. I just end with, always remember to use nudge for good. Thank you all.